there's something about the frailty of life that brings reality to our situation that we are not ultimate.
Especially,
and we are not. We are very finite.
Yeah.
And what we do here may for real carry some weight in what happens next.
Yeah.
Hello, and we're back.
What's up, everybody? Number 4.
Week 4. We made it.
Happening.
It's the end of the month.
Yes.
We made it a full month of Not Just Sunday podcast.
Not just Sunday.
That's worthy of celebration.
Weekly. It is.
Right?
It is. Yes.
And we do know and realize that we would not be here by ourselves.
That's true.
We have a team.
There's people
behind us that wanted to be, that is involved, that is making us look a lot better than we deserve.
For sure. So thank you.
So yes, thanks to all of those people who make it happen, make it sound good.
Yeah, and look good, and all the things.
Edit all the crazy things that we say out, so that we can have a much better podcast.
We's a lot of people.
Exactly.
I just need to say that.
Exactly.
The crazy things that we.
That is
saying,
true.
that
We be saying.
Right.
So we're here, week 4, end of February, looking towards March. We still got a couple episodes left.
I just want to say I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the content that, basically it all just came from, what are we going to do? We're going to try something. We're going to continue it on from December. Yeah. It was February is the month of love, right? So is God still love? But then digging down everyday questions, everyday people, not just Sunday. What are those things about? How do people question God's love?
Yeah, and being able to wrestle with it and hearing people's stories too. I mean, like over the last couple of weeks, thank you guys
after last
for speaking to, man, last week's was a lot. It was a lot. And hearing people's stories who have walked through things of like deep suffering, who live with physical disabilities, and them just coming and saying, hey, I still believe and I still know that God is good.
In our church, our serving.
Testifying to his goodness. So we were talking to them, and maybe there's some bonus stuff coming, possibly. Don't know.
If y'all want to see it, let us know. Let us know.
Yeah. And continue. You know, thank you guys for following, for making this what it is and being a part, commenting. We love it. Always open to also correction. And
for sure.
Hey, that's wrong. Let's wrestle with it.
And there's a reason why people don't talk about this stuff openly a lot, right? Yeah. Because you can't be afraid to be wrong. Right. And there's definitely a lot of room for that, right?
And for growth. So I think that's really been our heart, is like, hey, on Sunday, you preach a certain thing, and it's hard to get into a lot of the weeds and to ask the questions that we're all asking Monday through Saturday. Yeah,
and not anyone knows all the things, but we just want to drive people to a confident hope in who Jesus is.
Yeah, and we chose
to believe He's real,
right? Like we chose this direction for ourselves. Felt like God was leading in it, because most people are like, hey, let's do a series on love, and it's like relationships and like how to love your spouse, and like how to lovingly parent, or like single dating, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and not kicking that stuff, not kicking it at all, because it's necessary.
Let's take the route of like, is God love when there's just a bunch of junk happening in the world and evil exists, and like, okay,
because who is not at the effect of that in some way? Right. In some way.
Yeah.
Everybody. Yeah. Everybody. So it comes for us all, right? Yeah. Difficulty, death comes for us all.
Everybody.
Sickness and
born into it, right?
Yeah.
And we've kind of walked that line, and so it's been very good for us. We're wrestling with some of the same things you're wrestling with, just walking through. How do we communicate it more clearly? How do we find places? And then where does it end? And there's just a leap of faith of like, man, God is either good or He's not. Yeah. He's either loving or He's not. And walking through these scriptures and walking through all that has just been very fruitful. And so today is no different. The topic for today, after we've talked about evil and pain and suffering, loss, disabilities, is God still loving that? Today is an interesting topic, kind of around calamity. You're gonna throw the Bible word out
calamity.
There, right? Like calamity.
Calamity Jane. Where did that come from? That just came up to my mind.
Like
calamity.
Western,
it's like a thing or something. I think so. Put it in the comments. And if it's bad, I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know.
Let's just pivot. So calamity. But the idea of like pandemics, plagues, natural disasters.
Yes. So we were trying to ask the questions ourselves. Is God still love, or is God love when, with the question mark? So there's a book that I read back in 2020. Back in the day.
One of the most recent things that you've given so far. One of the most recent like evidence is normally it's like 90s, 99,
Let's see,
early 2000s.
Y'all see what I deal with? Like, this mess, all this smart mouth, all this.
That's why you're here. That's why you're here, to bring the wisdom, the mature eldership
to the 2
table.
months younger than I am. I don't want to hear it.
2 months?
Yeah.
I won't throw out how much younger I am, but that's okay. I need your wisdom at the table. So you read this book.
Yeah, you do. All right, so listen. It's called Pandemics, Plagues, Natural Disasters. So it's by a man called Erwin Lutzer. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this work right after the COVID pandemic in 2020. And he addresses a lot of stuff, has a lot of good things to say. So we wanted to give that to you as a resource. It'll be there in the notes. But
so you can find it yourself.
And a lot of what I say will come from this book. But it's a very relevant topic to today, not just going back to 2020, but today. Yeah. I mean, back in the fall, our church just engaged with the hurricane that went through Western North Carolina. So if you're listening from around, I mean, we're from Charlotte, and there was real devastation there. And today, I mean, we're in California was on fire.
Still rolling,
taking people's lives and homes and destroying things. So that's kind of the opening to today. Is there's the question: is God still love when some of the horrific
things are happening,
things that we heard about Western North Carolina,
plagues, and even I think is God still love, but what is God's role in it too? A little bit, and that there's difficult road to kind of walk on that one,
and to remember during COVID too, not to just hash old wounds, but I mean people lost family members in a way where you couldn't even be with them. You couldn't even be in that,
Yeah, I mean, like I remember celebrating Christmas over Zoom.
Yeah.
Like we had to send the things, and we were leaving packages outside for X amount of days so that they would be like, hey, now they're clean to bring in. I
forgot about that.
Some people did profit a lot from that. Like Amazon and streaming services when everybody shut down. I mean,
personal story. Who knew what Zoom was? Before COVID.
Before it was now everybody knows that term.
I remember I had a kid in my youth ministry, and I think she's listening. Kathleen, what's up, girl? So she has been listening. So I remember she had Zoom already because she had some college classes that she was taking and needed Zoom. Didn't know what it was. And she was like, yeah, you can use my account or whatever for this thing, and the church might want to look into getting one. I was like, no, we'll just use yours. And if this thing lasts any more than a couple weeks or so, I'll get the church an account for Zoom. Bro.
And it was weeks, years later.
You're talking about
now. My grandma knows how to work.
Zoom,
they're
it changed things.
They're on it. They're watching live streams, and it fundamentally has changed the way that we connect in a lot of ways.
Sure.
But I mean, there's just so where was God in that? Right? Was he orchestrating it? Was he allowing it? Was he doing all these type of things? And where was God with the hurricane? What does that look like? Does he still love me even though these things happen?
And that's in our current day context. I mean, you go into Lutzer's book. I mean, he starts pointing to a plague of grasshoppers in East Africa, also in Ethiopia and Kenya. Yeah. Understanding that
it's all over.
That you've got these grasshoppers, they're going to destroy the crops, and no doubt, he says, thousands of people, including children, will starve as a result. And then that's the question, where is God in all of that? I think, can
it be, right? And you're like. You're walking through all these things, but we know it throughout Scripture. I mean, throughout history, just history. Yeah. There's been plague after plague and natural disaster after natural disaster, and then it just leaves you questioning what happened and where was it? And I think we trace it back. At least for me, I think there's a framework here that we can operate from scripturally. Yeah. On the idea that in the beginning God made everything. He is the creator of all things.
It's good.
And of creation, right? The rules of creation, he also put into place, like gravity, and that it spins at a certain speed, and that, when things get too fast, tornadoes form. He creates all of the elements. He has created all the elements in the world. And now in the garden, everything was perfect. Everything was perfect. So there was probably no natural disasters, no storms, no anything. But again, and this is a common theme from all of our stuff, right? Suffering and the ability now because of sin and choice and kind of this step back a little bit from God's hands-on part of it creates instability.
Well, and we didn't talk about this before, but it brings the thought, talking about the fall.
Yeah.
What does that have to do? So did God allow or create or cause natural disasters, tornadoes, hurricanes, that kind of thing? So there's a theory for when you're talking about how did everything get here, whether you're an evolutionist or you're a creationist or intelligent design or whatever. So, there's a young earth theory, right? Where the earth is only what, I'm talking about, like 10, 12,000 years old, that things are not millions and millions and millions of years old. And that a lot of what we can see that scientists might call carbon dating to say, well, that's how we know it was from, this area, this period, and how, not to get too far down into that, but that theory would say that all of that we call carbon dating was caused by the flood. There's mud and it created layers, and there's evidence. So y'all go dig around in that. But the theory says that there was
these things too, right?
that there was ice surrounding the earth. Like that, the atmosphere, that there was a layer, a very thick layer of ice around the earth, and so it allowed for that kind of perfect existence, and that was kind of released during the flood, I believe. I mean, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, so what I'm saying is, like, there's the fall, and because of the fall of mankind, creation then, and we've been going to Romans a lot. You want to read that portion of Romans in just a second, that all creation, including humanity, we're groaning for things to return to their perfect way. Right? That things are broken now. And as a result of that brokenness, going back to that young earth theory, so is the earth. The earth is also broken and left without the protection that it was created with. And then therefore natural disasters can happen potentially like they didn't before.
And ultimately cursed, right? Like you get to Genesis 3, part of the fallout from the disconnection, eating of the fruit, and God's like, hey, okay, like now here's the consequences of that to that action. Is that, he puts the serpent on his belly, which just brings the question, like, did he have legs before? Like he puts the serpent on his belly so that he has to go. So,
so why do we still have lizards?
Random side note, right?
The questions we ask God when we get there.
Exactly.
Jennifer is my wife. One of her questions for God when we get over there is about belly buttons. Did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? Because that comes from an umbilical cord.
Yeah, I mean, results of the fall, right? Like putting on flesh. We can get into that one. That's a fun conversation. A lot of theories on that.
Remember that part where I said we use a lot of people and they got to edit this stuff out?
There we go. There it is.
Whose fault is it now?
But one of the consequences of it, right, is the serpent goes on his belly. The woman's childbearing will be super painful.
Sure.
And then he curses the ground. He curses the ground. So he curses the ground that is supposed to be perfect and changes the atmosphere at that moment. Like, hey, now not everything is perfect. Not everything is good. There's going to be moments where the earth that I created now is going to have issues. And so we go there, but then we see.
So then in God's perfect design, is it his perfect will that natural disasters would take place and kill people and harm people?
Right.
Or, harm dwellings? I don't think so.
Yeah. His will. And again, like the will and sovereignty and causation, like does he send it? Does he allow it? There's pieces of that that are true on maybe both sides a little bit as you see scripture. But as we're thinking it and kind of framing it like, hey, this is a result of the fall. He curses the ground. Creation changes at that moment, right? There's this release. There's things that happen. But it at that moment created the longing to be perfect again. In us as human beings, we are waiting and longing, and we endure, right? Even going back to last week's scripture in Romans 5, where it says, hey, what does suffering produce? When we rejoice in suffering, it produces endurance so that we can endure to the end when he completes the work. And same, I believe, is true of creation.
Sure.
And we get this from Romans 8, where he says, for I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worth comparing the glory that is to be revealed to us, right? Like the suffering that's happening right now is not worth comparing to what will be. What is going to be at the end of days when everything is again perfected for all time. For the creation, right? waits with eager longing for revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subject to futility, not willingly, but because of the fall. It wasn't willing, but it happened. But because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation, all of it, the ground, the atmosphere, the world, all a bit of it. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And he continues, which then brings it kind of full circle. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have been the first fruits of the Spirit, grown inwardly, and we wait eagerly for adoption as his sons and the redemption of our broken bodies. I added broken, but the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he has seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait with patience. And so there's the brokenness in the world, and all of creation is groaning to be perfected again. And so then we have issues in the pain.
And with every subject that we have or will cover, as it relates to this season, on not just Sunday, we're pointing to hope.
Yeah.
And
the hope is him. I mean, like these verses saying, hey, that all of creation is looking for the hope to come.
Points to eternity.
And all of the children of God are groaning inwardly, saying, I am waiting because this world, we're having troubles. We got tribulation. We have evil. We have brokenness because of what has happened. There's a disconnect. And we're groaning for it to be completed and perfected because this is rough. It's a rough ride.
Yeah, so even in the middle of that, we can be praying for those people. I mean, because Western North Carolina is not fixed. Yeah. There are people today that still live. Like, we've got a staff member, here that was impacted by COVID, and it almost took him out. And he still lives with lives with the results of it.
Yeah, residual.
There's people right now who are grieving the loss of folks who have been lost in a fire or those kinds of things. And he's here. In the book, I just want to point to this. He says, it's little comfort to be told that pandemics, plagues, and natural disasters have been happening with regularity since the beginning of human history, since the fall. And he points to this hope, right, that we talked about. The only way that you can really get hope in its real perspective is to allow that to come to you through the Holy Spirit. Right. And when Christian people do that, we don't grieve. The Bible tells us that we are unique in our grieving. Yeah. That because we don't just grieve for grief's sake or just to be sad, but we grieve as a people of hope. Right. Knowing that there is a God who is in control that ultimately will bring all things back together to his perfect will. Yeah. Right? I mean, so we do not grieve as people that don't have hope. Yeah. Our hope is different. Here in the book, I don't remember exactly where it is, but he talks about the art of, or the beginning, or the creativity of Christianity starts with grief. That there was, when you look at Jesus, that he died on the Friday. Saturday was silent, but they still had enough faith to show up on Sunday morning. Yeah, that's hope, the thing. Right? The hope that he's going to be alive. Right. Yeah. And that there's, anyway, I could go down that road for a long time, but basically he points to the effect of those who know Jesus, who have hope in the middle of these things, that the church can bring. I mean, you said yourself, like the church was on the ground in Western North Carolina before, and I'm not throwing darts or arrows at people. Yeah.
But they were there. I mean, like the church as a people, the church as a group, and it's a crazy thing to say, but I wrote it down this way. And hey, are pandemics, plagues, and natural disasters, are all of these opportunities
God uses
to
them.
Show up and to show out our hope that's in it, that it's an eternal and not a temporary. Yeah, right? Like that's crazy to say. I get it because there's so much devastation in the middle of it, and so many pieces of it that are like, hey, people's lives were lost. But it is different.
But how many souls were won? And I'm not saying that God caused this thing so that souls could be won, but it is. We talked about it last week too. It's a matter of perspective. Yeah. You get to choose your perspective on things, right? Yeah. And what you continue to believe. But I just thought that, in the room now, and it's a beautiful thing. How many lives were lost, but how many souls were won? Like, go back to.
I mean, there's a real reality when you watch a natural disaster and watch just unexpected devastation. Yeah. Right. We weren't expecting it. to make you question, where are you going to go if that happens to you tomorrow?
Sure.
Like, and I think the same thing with like suffering and evil too, is like, there's something about the frailty of life that brings reality to our situation that we are not ultimate.
Especially,
we are not. We are very finite.
Yeah.
And what we do here may for real carry some weight in what happens next.
Yeah.
And, not to discredit, because we have to be very careful, because saying that thing like right after it happens, like, well, God's going to do something great. We can believe that, but saying those things out loud.
Can we just grieve with our people?
Yeah, like, man.
Can we, yeah.
If we rolled up to Western North Carolina and we're like, yo, like everything is just so destroyed, but God's going to use it for his good,
Yeah.
Like, I love these lines, but your testimony, like that whole ordeal in the middle of it. We need to be with them in the middle of it.
It's too soon. Right.
But do I believe that there's a hope that believers carry in the middle of all of that? Even in the idea of like, COVID, right?
Yeah.
Like, man, there was a lot of fear mongering, a lot of fear driven things, but balancing the act of like, man, how do I love my neighbor? But also, I'm not scared to maybe die because I know where I'm going. And so how do I love my neighbor enough to step into whatever may happen? Like, I'm not scared. And one of the verses that we have used to kind of frame this whole conversation was 1 John 4. And in there is where we get one of the most quoted verses of all time, is like, perfect love cast out fear. But what is he saying there? He's saying that God is love, and that as we abide in him and he abides in us, that it's his love that fills us from our feet to our head. So we are not lacking, and then we're not scared.
Right.
We don't have this fear. It actually says that love is completed in us. It says perfected is completed in us. His love is, so that it casts out fear, that we're no longer scared of death, because fear comes from judgment. And when we are filled with his love and understand our identity in him, come natural disasters, pandemics, plagues, or suffering, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
The fear of that is cast out.
Yeah. And therefore, I can put my faith into action.
Come on.
There's a lady I heard. I was very young, and I had just gotten saved, maybe been saved a year or two. And I remember she was speaking, and she said, I just want to get to a place that there is nothing on an earthly physical circumstance, nothing.
Come on.
That can touch what I have with my God.
Yeah.
Understanding things happen, bad stuff happens, but and she kind of beat on her chest, and she, mimicked her heart and was like, bump, 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 bump. What makes you do that? Yeah. That was the thing, and I've carried that with me for years. Now, Lutzer in the book, he says, many Christians, I thought this was powerful, have often displayed, and this is to your point, unusual courage in the midst of a widespread pandemic. When plagues swept through the Roman Empire, 20% of the population died, and pagans, these are just non-Christian people, took note of how the Christians suffered with hope, and they said they carry their dead as if in triumph. It says Marcus Aurelius spoke of caravans of wagons filled with bodies making their way through the streets of Roman cities, and it was the Christians who distinguished themselves from the world around them. Indeed, some historians believe that Christianity may not have become the dominant religion of Rome were it not for these massive epidemics that gave believers the opportunity to prove the triumph of the Christian faith.
Wow.
It's huge.
Yeah. Like, their reaction is what set us all apart, right? It's what set them apart, for them to be like, hey, there's something different about those people than the other people who are going through this. Like, man, buried their people with, like, it was a triumph. Yeah. That's a wild line.
He says in here, learning not to fear death. He continues, a system of thought and feeling thoroughly adapted to a time of troubles.
Like, they're ready. Like, they knew.
And if you are, I would just venture to say, if you are going to be and remain a Christian for the long haul, that has to become your story. Having a system of thought and feeling thoroughly adapted to a time of troubles. Not only did the Christians accept the death of their friends with a note of triumph, but they were willing to risk their own lives to help others.
Yeah.
There's a bishop of Carthage says he seems almost to have welcomed the great epidemic of his time. Writing in AD 251, he claimed that not only that only non-Christians had to fear the plague.
Yeah. And that's, I think that even like a testimony like Western North Carolina, because the words that we were hearing were, bro, the church was set up for it.
Yeah.
Like they were ready to respond. They were waiting for, like they were the first ones on the ground. Ready, it wasn't the organizations. It wasn't the local whatever. It was the church that was like, hey, we're here already. Yeah. We're in the community. Let's love. They opened their doors, started feeding people, started doing the thing. Like they were ready to respond because they were there, and they were in God, the love that was in them, which I think is like, even just hearing you talk, like the verses that we started with framing this whole idea of Ephesians 3 and 1 John 4 is like, man, okay, if we understand the depths and the breadth and the length of God's love for us, and there's a peace that surpasses understanding, that is to be good to us and that we would be complete. And he follows that up. John says the same thing. Like, it's that perfect love that is in us, because God is love. And if God is in us, and it casts out the fear of death, of ridicule, of what may come, that we can step into things in a fearless manner because the fullness of love is on us. But not just on us, that it is in us. Right. That we carry it no matter what. And so in all of these things, we've talked a lot about how we can respond and how we can view it. I think some of the other questions around natural disasters, right, are, does God do them? Does he use them? Does he send them? And I think there's multiple layers to this answer, and we've even had trouble kind of walking through, okay, what do we land? But I think there's some thoughts here around framework, like God is sovereign. Yeah. He is sovereign. He's over it all. He's in control of it all. The question of can he use it and will he use it are probably two different things. Yeah. Can he? 100%. God can do whatever he wants. And he can stop it. Could he stop it? Yes. The tsunami comes up. Could he have stopped the wave mid-wave and sent it back?
And can we sit here and explain why God choosing sometimes to intervene and sometimes not to? Right. I mean, that's what we were saying, that this whole conversation would be a lot easier if you don't see evidence of God intervening over time, because then it causes the question, well, when do you intervene? When do you not intervene? Yeah. And then, sometimes you just got to say, that's the sovereignty of God. And I don't know.
Like his ways are higher. Like we have to come with the mindset of like, he is just so much smarter than we are and wiser than we are. And I can't account for those lives to save these lives. Like, I need to wash my hands of that one.
Yes, I need to be able to.
And like, he's not good if he does this and does that. I think another maybe damaging idea that we love to cling to is that all natural disasters, pandemics, and plagues are for judgment. Some of them are for judgment. Yeah. And some of them are not.
Are due to a broken, fallen world. Yeah. I mean, that's what I believe.
Ultimately to God's glory and to whatever his plan is. Sure. But we do see in Scripture him using these out of judgment for certain people, groups, to protect Israel. Yeah. We see him sending the plagues.
I was going to say, we talked about the plagues.
We've kind of gone there a couple times to free his people. Like bringing sickness, bringing death, bringing a lot out of protection for his people, out of judgment for other people. Right. And, to walk that line, like, man, is that good? Is that loving? Is that kind? Well, for those who are his, ultimately loving, but his ways are way outside of our control, and he can also influence it. I mean, Jesus is in the boat. We talked about this, right? Like, Jesus is in the boat, the storm is going on, his disciples are like freaking out, and they're like, dude, what's going to happen? We're surely going to die. This natural disaster, this natural storm is going to kill us. Jesus wakes up and he's like, chill, calm, and it's all done. Like, he can do it.
Can I go back to bed now?
Yeah, he's like, hey, I'm going back to the bottom. And so, like, he is powerful enough to do it. Yeah. Can he use it? Yes.
100.
Does he cause it? No.
I don't think so.
I mean, but will
maybe if it was in the case of for judgment? Yeah. You see that with the plagues.
That one seems to be pretty specific. It's like when he uses it and brings it, that it is in a case of judgment. But then we see storms and stuff happen throughout even just his ministry, right? Like Paul's ministry, like shipwrecks, the storms, like stuff happens. Yeah. And that's just a natural thing that because of the fall and the growing pains and the thing. And so like just framing it that way, I think we can come into these positions and plagues, natural disasters, we can respond differently.
We can.
Because of the love that we have.
If you go back to Romans chapter 8, toward the end, it says something reminiscent of Ephesians chapter 3, where he says, I'm sure that neither death, life, angels, rulers, nothing present can separate us, right? Height, depth, anything in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. And that's Romans chapter 8. And Lutzer says, just think of what Paul is saying. No pandemic, no plague, or natural disaster that overtakes us can ever separate us from God's love. Then he says, here's the reality that we live in. Clearly, God has not chosen to deliver us from these tragedies, but rather, he's chosen to grant us grace to go through such trials without explanations. We said it last week. That's the water. That's you got to go drink the water. You got to show up. It's there. We are not guaranteed deliverance from disaster, but promise that his presence is there as we go through such trials. John Piper called COVID-19 a bitter providence, but says that the believer can find sweetness in it. Knowing that the same sovereignty, this is big, knowing that the same sovereignty that could stop the coronavirus, yet doesn't, is the same, or is the very sovereignty that sustains the soul in it. And not only sustains, but sees to it that everything bitter and sweet works together for our good, the good of those who love God, are called in Christ.
That we need it all. Like he knows what we need more than we know what we want. And he's there for our good. And so I think that's a good way to end it. The next couple episodes are going to be pretty interesting. Next week is supposed to be people, politics, power. It's like that's gonna be that'll be a real fun one.
We like alliteration, right?
Yeah, I mean we do, but that one's tough. So
it is tough.
Today, hey, thank you guys for joining in. Leave comments, questions. Maybe we answered it, maybe we didn't. Maybe we felt like, hey, you left it open. We can always come back, circle back.
Like week one,
love to hear from you.
Lady came up and was like, well, you cause more questions than answers, but
Hey,
that's the deal.
It's good. I mean, we're processing. You're processing. That's why it's not just Sundays.
Yeah, it's not just Sundays.
So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.